If you are joining us here at paragraph 2, you might have missed the start. In paragraph 1, I explained how I digitized an ancient document I was given to make it publicly available online. The text was written by Pastor Van Eijck van Heslinga at the beginning of the last century. He was documenting the history of the church from its earliest settlements to his own time, while being reprimanded by the church, who urged him to stop writing about its early history. For those who want to read the original text, it is available on the Uralinda wiki. With that said, and without further ado, let's dive into this episode. Paragraph 2. The Gods of the Ancient Frisians. To understand the religion of the Frisians, we can rely on accounts from both Frisian and foreign writers, as well as on surviving traces in place names, stones, or what we call now folklore. Among the Germanic gods, it's Wodan who appears to have been worshipped first and foremost in Friesland. His name, meaning guide or leader, lives on in a place named Warns, Wanswert, Warnvliet, and Warntille, near Wommels and Edens. It also appears in Warnsat, in East Friesland, which is in Germany. It appears in personal names such as Wander and Warner, just like Ymir survives in Ime and Riemer, and it returns in the name of the middle day of the week, Waasdi, which means Wednesday. A sanctuary dedicated to him once stood in Warns, and perhaps in Wanswert as well, although nothing certain is known about that. He was often depicted with a staff entwined by a serpent, which is why the Romans identified him with Mercury. The constellation, known as the Pleiades, was believed to be Wodan's chariot. When the storm howled through the forest, the pagan Frisians thought of Wodan's wild hunt and believed he heard its thundering passage in the wind. On the island of Walcheren, Willibrord shattered a golden idol dedicated to him. No less widespread was the worship of Thor, the god of thunder. Among the Thuringians, he was called Stuffo. Among the Frisians, Stavo, a name believed to be related to the Frisian word stuf, meaning strong or steadfast. Place names such as Ternate, once called Tunevert, are thought to be derived from this name, Tunar, Thunder, or Donar. Other possible links includes Donjem, Domwier, and Donjeburen. The name of the weekday, Dongersdi, or Dongerstij, which means Thursday, also reflects his legacy. A great temple to Thor, or Stavo, stood in Stavoren. He was represented in bronze statues, wearing a golden crown encircled by 12 stars and holding a ruler's staff. It was said that he rode a chariot pulled by 2 goats. His attributes included a hammer that always returned to him, a belt that doubled his strength, and iron gloves that allowed him to wield his hammer. His palace was said to have 540 halls, where even slaves and the unfree could dwell after death. Thor was honored by both human and animal sacrifices, particularly bulls and goats. Because Thor loved the oak tree, priests and worshippers wore garlands, and assemblies were often held beneath oaks. The bull, too, was sacred to him, and was even called Thor's helper. Thunderstones and thunder chisels, thought to be his weapons in the fight against giants, were also venerated as sacred symbols. Thor's wife, Foste, not to be confused with Fosite, was worshipped by the Frisians as well. She had a sanctuary on the island of Ameland, and her name is preserved in Voswert. She was also known as Sif or Siva. A tale tells of how the mischievous Loki once cut off her hair. The gods then forced him to have the dwarf Sindri forge golden hair for her, which is how she came to possess her famous golden locks. Some claim that the name Vetse comes from Foste, and that the Vetse spring near Dokkum is connected to her, but this seems far-fetched. The Romans identified her with Vesta, which is understandable. but there's no real basis for such a connection. In addition to Thor's cult, there must also have been worship of Tyr or Tursko, the god of war. His name survives in personal names such as Theo, Thiasso, and Tiso, as well as in the weekday name Tiesti, which means Tuesday. Where he was worshipped remains unknown. Tyr was Thor's ally in difficult undertakings. His courage and insight were legendary. He had only one arm. Once, when the god feared the wolf Fenrir, Tyr agreed to a pact. The wolf would allow himself to be bound if Tyr placed his arms in the wolf's mouth. Tyr did so. But when the gods refused to release the wolf, it bit off Tyr's arm. Thus, the god of war lost his limb to save the others. Widespread was also the worship of Freya, goddess of love, also known as Freya. Friday is named after her, Freyt. Her chariot was pulled by cats, which were therefore considered sacred, as were falcons because Freya often took the form of a bird. Her amber necklace, called Brising, was legendary. Wodan has taught her the art of Seid, or magic, and her prophetic powers were limitless. Her palace was called Folkwang. She had great altars and was honored with so-called Truttenstones. Under the influence of Christianity, Freya became a figure of fear in Frisian imagination. A witch. Cats remained associated with her, now as evil spirits. The term Trutte, once sacred, became an insult and remained so. Often confused with Foste is Fosite or Fosete, the son of Nanna, wife of Baldur. He was known for his incorruptible sense of justice. People would travel to his sanctuary on the island of Helgoland to receive divine judgment. Here stood the most revered seat of justice for gods and humans alike. Near his temple was a sacred spring, and around it grazed holy cattle. Anyone who touched these animals or drew water from the spring without reverence was struck with madness or sudden death. When Willibrord came to Helgoland to preach the gospel, he slaughtered some of these cattle for his people and baptized 3 individuals in the spring. The locals, furious, dragged him before King Radboud, who was then on the island. Radboud waited to see whether Fosite would punish the sacrilege. When nothing happened, he allowed Willibrord to explain himself. Willibrord did so with such courage and sincerity that Radboud said, "I see that your deeds match your words," and he let him go free. The worship of Freyr, Hef and Baldur was likely also known in these lands, though there are no detailed records. Freyr's worship involved burial of the dead. Wodan's involved cremation. Thus the difference between urn and non-urn graves may hint at differing cult practices. Baldur's wife was Nanna. Is the presence of her name in Frisian records a sign of Baldur worship, or did it arrive with the Norse? Whether and where Hel, goddess of the underworld, was worshipped in Friesland is unknown. Yet more than one place is called Rehel, which means red hell, and the traditional burial paths leading to cemeteries used exclusively for funerals may have been dedicated to Hel. Perhaps they retained this character because Hel never releases what is hers. We do not know, but one practice in eastern Friesland stands out. Once a body was carried along a road, that road had to remain a public funeral path forever. Was it believed that the path had become sacred to Hel? We cannot say more than speculate. The same goes for the goddess Medea, who supposedly had a temple in Medemblik, later desecrated by Wigbert, who destroyed her image. No one knows who she was, nor do we know the identity of Kom, a god worshipped on Helgoland. One curious detail: in 1883, a 3rd century altar was found near Housesteads by Hadrian's Wall in North England. It had been erected by Frisian cavalrymen and read, "To the god Mars, Dingso, and to the two Alaisiagia, Beda and Fimilene." The relief shows a warrior with a spear and shield, and at his right is a swan, symbol of the sea god Njord, and on either side 2 flying women, one holding a sword, the other a wrath. Clearly, these Frisian riders, stationed in Britain under Severus Alexander, were worshipping Mars, whom they identified with Tiu or Tyr, but the meaning of the rest is uncertain. Similarly puzzling is a votive stone found in 1888 in Beetgem, dedicated to the goddess Hiudana. Grateful fishermen, led by their commander Quintus Valerius Secundus, declared they had fulfilled their vow to her. She is thought to have been worshipped in Friesland as a goddess of the waters, protector of sailors and fishermen. Similar stones have been found along the Rhine, but we lack solid evidence. Less reliable reports mention the worship of the sun in Snake under the name Snine, which means Sunday, and the moon that we find back on the Monday, which means the moon day. Roman writers list several Roman gods, supposedly honored by the Frisians. Part of this can be explained by the Romans identifying native deities with their own when they noticed similarities. Partly too, it is true that Roman gods were worshipped in Friesland, but by the Romans themselves. In various burial mounds, such as in Dronriep, bronze figurines of Apollo, Mars, Mercury, Ceres, Venus, and Bacchus have been found. These ones belonged to Romans who had settled there under Corbulo. So yes, our knowledge of the Frisian gods is far from complete, but it is detailed enough to let us form a picture of their heathen religion. And we are all the more capable of doing so thanks to the ancient records that have reached us about their pagan rites. My offering to the world is to create stories, films, and experiences that carry the meaning of a larger paradigm shift. Each piece I share is a part of a larger vision that I'm nurturing, and I welcome anyone who is along for the ride. If my work nourishes you, here is a way to reciprocate. There is a bowl at the center of this path, a place where you can offer something in return. Every contribution helps the vision grow. That vision is in harmony of sustainability. So, I will not be eating your gift. It will go towards the internet bill, fuel cost, and anything else to keep this channel up and running. And any gift of any size is received with gratitude and care. So I thank you. And now, let's continue with the episode. As a native Frisian, I must begin by saying that I disagree with the links that Van Eijck van Heslinga makes between the names of the gods, Frisian first names, and the place names. These connections feel speculative to me and not solid. I don't deny that these gods were worshipped in this area, but I don't see the deep ingrained cultural roots that Van Eijck van Heslinga suggests. That said, I do agree with his view on the origins of the names of the weekdays. To me, they follow a system very similar to the one held by the Romans. What we see in northwestern Europe in reality just seems a local version of that same model. A simple example: Wednesday, which in northwestern tradition is linked to Odin, stands next to the French mercredi, which is a much better and direct link to the god Mercury. However, there are important details left out. In Frisian, the word for Sunday is snine, and this word doesn't have the word sun in it at all. By contrast, Dutch has zondag, or the English word Sunday, clearly does. Saturday is also overlooked. In Frisian, it is sneun, while Dutch has zaterdag, close to the English Saturday. This traces back to the Roman worship of Saturn, or maybe even to the satyrs, horned pagan figures tied to the Greek Dionysus. The incompleteness here shows that the system is not purely native. It strongly suggests a Roman framework, locally adapted, rather than something specific to the Frisians. Another conflation made by Van Eijck van Heslinga is with his comparison between Odin and Mercury, because of the snake on the staff. This, however, is a messy point. In my research, I've never found an image of Odin with a staff and a serpent. That image belongs to Asclepius, the god of medicine and healing. Mercury does not carry this staff. His symbol, the caduceus, has 2 snakes, not 1, and is tied not to healing, but to commerce, alchemy, and deception. This is a crucial difference that needs unraveling. Now, it is true that certain natural landscapes, trees, and wells were considered sacred by the native Frisians, but I have never found a strong reference connecting Thor to the oak tree. That doesn't mean that the claim is false, but it does raise questions. Often, it is difficult to trace exactly which sources Van Eijck van Heslinga is using or how deep those sources really go. As for Freya, she is by many viewers well known from the Audiobook, but in that text she is never portrayed with a chariot or with cats. Those attributes may have entered later, perhaps through a merger with the Eastern goddess Cybele, who was often shown with 2 great felines as her guardians. Over time, Freya herself seems to have undergone a cultural degradation. Once venerated as sacred, she later became associated with witchcraft and magic. This change makes sense to me. When a culture that honored women is overtaken by a foreign power, one of the easiest ways to dominate is to strip women of their sacred role and turn them into figures of fear. Then there is the curious notion of a temple of Medea in Medemblik. Historians rarely acknowledge this, yet the Oeralinda confirms it directly. And this is very typical of the Oeralinda. It seems to validate itself by producing connections in the rarest places. I have even conferred with researcher Jan Ott to trace the original source of this claim, but so far no one we know has yet laid eyes on that original source text. Finally, I want to highlight the Roman statues found in Donrip. They are generally assumed to be linked to Roman settlers under Corbulo, who held the Rhine as a border of the so-called enemy. If this is true, then these settlers were living inside enemy territory, and this is significant. It explains why Roman influence is only faintly present in Frisian cultures and in some weekdays. It shows that our ancestors lived right at the threshold between Roman cultivation and Nordic preservation. And what was preserved above all is a culture shaped far more by Northern beliefs than by Roman rule. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and want to support our work, you can do so either through a donation or by checking out our sponsors, Blue Earth Innovations. They do amazing work infusing water with the most powerful frequency of love and gratitude, purifying it and removing unnatural elements like chlorine, fluoride, drug residue, and forever chemicals. Consider their Blue Health system. It is a one-time investment of just 1,980 euros, and you'll never pay for filters again. Cleansing yourself and the earth has never been this affordable. Use the code ParadigmShift at checkout for 5% off all purchases. If you haven't yet already, please subscribe to the channel, give us a boost in the algorithm by liking this video, and leave a comment sharing what you enjoyed most. And with all that said, we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.